Hi everybody, Eric Thompson with Subtle Energy Sciences here, and today this is the first of a series of videos I'm going to do that will cover many of the different scientific foundations and principles and studies and experiments done that are related to what I've coined as digital energy medicine. And the first one today that we're going to start with, as you can see on your screen here, you're looking at a gentleman by the name of William Tiller. He is a professor emeritus at Stanford University. And in the science of subtle energy research, Dr. Tiller has done some seminal, very important work. What we're going to talk today about is an experiment he did involving the interaction of human intention, subtle energy, and even electrical current and electrical circuits. And this is interesting because as we go on in this series, you're going to find that there are other related studies that have shown and have been repeated that have shown without a doubt that human intention seems to have a subtle energetic component, a subtle energetic body, if you will. That every intention, every thought, every belief system has a subtle energetic component to it, and that this subtle energetic component to thought and to human consciousness can actually interact with and even influence electrical circuits. So for example, there have been experiments done with random number generators that use quantum noise as a way of generating random numbers. And they do this in a specific way because I guess typically it's difficult for any computer to actually create genuine randomness because there's always some type of pattern involved in the electrical circuit. However, with the random number generators, they have found that whenever you put them in an environment where there is either some type of concentrated subtle energy or concentrated human effort to intentionally influence the random number generator, what they've found is that in fact there are these measurable patterns of order that start to emerge in these random number generators in the presence of subtle energy and human intention. And this speaks to other research that has shown over and over and over again that subtle energy has a negentropic effect, and that means that it increases order. It actually reduces entropy and increases order, or by reducing randomness, in other words. So where you have a highly ordered environment, you have less chaos and you have less entropy and less loss of information. So interestingly, there were also studies done in the late 19th century by one of the earliest subtle energy researchers by the name of von Reichenbach, and he also found that subtle energy could travel through electrical circuits much like electricity. So what Dr. Tiller was working with, what he worked with, he and his the other people that he published this study with, the other scientists, they found that they could imprint human intention on a device that they called an IIED, and that stands for Intention Imprinted Electronic Devices. And so what they found was they would create this device here, and this device was made up of simple electronic oscillator circuits, an EEPROM digital memory component, and it was powered either by a battery or by direct line power. And then what they would do is they'd take the device, set it on a table, and four expert meditators would sit around this table and meditate in the presence of this device. Now, they would, these were expert meditators, so they would meditate together with exactly the same protocols and exactly the same intention. They'd enter into a very deep state of meditation. And the idea here is, what this seems to suggest is that by entering into this deep state of meditation, they were actually consciously communing and influencing the quantum vacuum. This is very important. So once they entered this deep state of meditation, they'd set an intention to cleanse the device of any existing imprints. And then they would imprint a specific intention on this device. Now, once they had done that, they would then take the device and they'd store it in what is known as a Faraday cage. Now, Faraday cages are basically insulating devices or cages that completely isolate the device from any type of electromagnetic influence, so that you can have that ruled out. So they would store the device in a Faraday cage, and then they would ship it off to a lab as far as 2,000 miles away. Now, this was repeated over and over again, and they would ship the devices to various different labs. And one of the specific intentions that they would program this device with was the intention to change the pH level of a glass of water to a specific decimal point. Now, what's interesting about this is that every time they did this, the experiment was successful, meaning that when they would imprint the device in meditation, they would say something like, we intend for this device to change the pH level of a glass of water that's sitting on the right of the table in the lab. And that glass of water on the right, we intend for its pH level to be changed, either lowered or raised to a specific decimal point degree. Now, what's interesting about this is that when it comes to pH levels in water, the tiniest reduction in pH level of water, and particularly of the water in the human body, can actually result in death. So we're talking about the ability to create very powerful changes in physical substances simply by programming electrical circuits with human intention. Now, remember, we said that human intention has an energetic component or an energetic body. So if one part of the intention has to do with the interior of human consciousness, it's more experiential, then the other aspect of human intention has an energetic component that can be measured, but it would have to be measured using very unique, precise tools for measuring subtle energy, rather than using the conventional electromagnetic instruments that have often been used to try and detect subtle energy. One of the reasons that electromagnetism may not be able in itself to detect subtle energy is because it's of a lower gradation of energy than subtle energy. So in other words, it's not resonating fast enough to detect subtle energy. But that said, this subtle energetic component of human intention has been measured in other ways, including in this experiment. So what they found was every one of these were successful. So this comes back to how this relates to digital energy medicine is the idea that subtle energy can interact with digital circuits and computer circuits. And you can actually use computer circuitry as a broadcast device for subtle energy. Now, this is very powerful. So this is one of the founding principles of the digital energy medicine tools that we create here at Subtle Energy Sciences. Now, what this study found in all these in this series of studies, what they found were two very unique scientific anomalies. The first thing they found was that an electronic circuit can be programmed with human intention via meditation. That's right. Now, it may not be apparent from just this one study because many people will say, well, I need to see these kinds of results replicated. Well, first of all, they replicated this study many, many times. Number two, there is a whole huge body of scientific evidence showing similar results, that indeed electrical circuits can be programmed with human intention. Now think about this, and Dr. Tiller brings this out in one of his books, that the future of subtle energy technology has the potential to revolutionize our entire scientific paradigm and all of our technology, because it would give us the ability to literally program our technology with organic, subtle, energetic human intention that is accurate to any level, any decimal point. So we're talking about incredible accuracy. Imagine being able to program various electrical devices and factories that are controlled by computers with intentions that are so accurate that really they can't be beat. Now imagine being able to do that. And what's literally guiding that program is your own elevated consciousness and human intention, because these programs would be and are made while in a deep state of balance, a singularity of equilibrium, of balance, of deep connection to the highest order of things. This has the potential to really revolutionize science. Now, the second anomaly was that even though we don't know how to create these specific circuits to create these specific tasks, whatever they might be, none of that matters. All we have to do is embed or imprint the intention while we're in a profound state of meditation, and then the universe knows exactly how to bring it to pass and how to accomplish the task. All we've got to do is embed the intention into the circuit. This is potentially revolutionary, very powerful. So what he found in all these experiments was all kinds of side effects, what he referred to as strange phenomena. And after doing more and more measurements, he came to the conclusion that the subtle energy in these devices, and here's the thing to keep in mind, this subtle energy that they're measuring isn't confined to just these devices. Subtle energy can be embedded in all kinds of things. And as I say, that we also create subtle energy tools. So this isn't speaking to just his devices in general, but to subtle energy in general. So that said, what he found was that the subtle energy in these devices was actually conditioning the space within the lab. And in fact, when he's referred to this in his books, he has sometimes referred to it as raising the consciousness of the actual space in the lab. So literally, the lab was charged with subtle energy. And after he investigated all these anomalies and did all this measurement, he realized that these were happening because of properties due to the space itself. That is, not the air going through the space, but the actual space. The consciousness or the energetic potential of the space had been raised. And what he found was this literally raised the level of what was possible within the confines of that conditioned space. So when he did other measurements, he found that these devices, the subtle energy in these devices, again, subtle energy being produced by the human intention that was stored on these devices during deep meditation, he found that it produced a phenomenon known in subtle energy research as the phenomenon of concentric rings, or sometimes they just call them charge rings, okay? And these charge rings have been detected around orgone accumulators as designed by Wilhelm Reich. They've been detected around Ormus elements, around megalithic stone sites, and around other places with high concentrations of subtle energy. And you may have heard me talk before about this idea of sweet spots, and that is if you're in a sacred site, or if you're using a subtle energy device, perhaps one of ours, once you get to know the device and working with it, you'll begin to find that there are various areas around the device in which the energetic current will feel stronger than if you just stand directly next to the device. If you stand away from it a little bit, you'll notice that the energy can actually feel stronger. And that's because the energy is emanating in these concentric rings, much like ripples in water. And that is why I believe one of the reasons why subtle energy has been shown to have such an affinity for water and a deep relationship with water. It's because it moves in energetic patterns much like water does. It behaves much like water energetically. So very, very powerful. So this idea of sweet spots, keep that in mind when you work with some of our tools. Now, what he found then is that once these spaces were charged with subtle energy, that it became a highly conditioned space, and it would actually increase the effectiveness of various healing modalities. Now, this is interesting because there really is also a growing body of scientific research showing other experiments related to this, so that when they, for example, condition a space using various kinds of spiritual practices or subtle energy, what will happen is when they test certain healing modalities in that lab or in that space, they will tend to be far more successful than if they did it without conditioning the space. Now, this is incredibly important. What does this tell you? Well, let's look at one of the things he also noticed. Dr. Tiller found that if certain people would walk into the lab, then all these effects would start to stop. And what does that mean? Well, this series of studies, combined with all the other studies out there that I'm aware of, leads me and many other scientists and researchers to say that our human consciousness, both conscious and even our unconscious consciousness, that is, all these unconscious processes that are going on within us and within our energetic bodies around us, they are always influencing the world around us. And they have decisive, measurable effects in the laboratory. Now, what does this mean? This means that, for example, if you do a double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment, even with all those controls, they don't necessarily control certain aspects of our consciousness that can influence those results. So, for example, let's say that there's a certain healing modality like Qigong, that's being studied by a group of scientists in the lab, and they're using placebo-controlled experiments and double-blind controls as much as they can. Yet, if there's anybody within that study, and there's going to be at least one person that knows that the overall study is designed to measure the effects of Qigong, even if there's only one person that knows that, now this person may not know who's getting the treatment and who is getting the treatment, who's getting it and who isn't. They may not know all the other things, but that doesn't matter. As long as they know that the study is being designed to measure the results of Qigong healing, and then more than likely, basically what the research shows is whatever preconceived notions that researcher may have, they may not even be aware of those notions. They may think they're being completely open-minded. But as soon as they set foot in that lab, they're actually influencing the energetic results of that study. They're influencing it energetically. Their belief systems, their preconceived notions are all having an energetic effect. And in fact, there are stories of where healers could not successfully basically heal people when in the presence of onlookers who were either skeptical or neutral or what have you. Yet when those people leave, the healer all of a sudden becomes successful. Why is that? It's because their own consciousness was able to condition the space, because no one else was there to decondition the space and bring the consciousness of that space back down to where the higher possibilities were no longer possible. What's that saying? It's saying that you and I are are constantly affecting the world around us energetically, whether we realize it or not. I realize that for some of you, this is going to be a very difficult thing to believe, and you're going to need to see more evidence for that. I certainly respect that, but I just ask you to keep an open mind and do the research. If you do look at research conducted or reviewed by skeptics, for example, be willing to look at that same research through the eyes of other people who aren't necessarily skeptics, but are more open-minded. Why? Because you're going to find that this research can be interpreted in various different ways, but just be willing to look at all the different data points. Very, very important. And at the very least, what I believe this is going to lead us to is the realization that as good and as powerful as the scientific method can be, because science has this very subjective and scientifically unproven postulate that subjectivity and objectivity are two entirely different domains of experience, because they have that postulate, that's keeping them from actually integrating our subjectivity, human consciousness, into the scientific paradigm in such a way that allows us to be aware of how it's affecting experiments more deeply than we've been aware of it in the past, so that our scientific experiments investigation can be much, much more accurate. But because we're not accounting for these subjective influences, subjective energetic influences, and how they're actually influencing our scientific results, we're getting skewed scientific results. And again, this comes back to us realizing that subjectivity and objectivity are two sides of the same coin. They cannot be divorced from one another, as the scientific community seems to believe as a whole. Now, getting to the conclusion of this study, what they found was that when he measured the pH of this water using litmus paper, using chemical tests, he found that the chemistry of the water had not changed at all. So the litmus paper did not detect a change. However, if they would take the same water and they'd measure it using a digital pH meter, it would show an anomaly every time. It would start giving, quote unquote, incorrect readings. So what they found was that it only did this. The digital pH meters only gave these quote unquote incorrect readings whenever they were testing water that had indeed been influenced by one of the IIED devices, which was to say only when there was actual subtle energy present in the water. And what they found was that they could find out the amount of subtle energy presence through the difference of the reading on the pH meter, the digital pH meter, the difference between that and the litmus paper tests. That would tell them how much subtle energy was present in the water, such that the larger the difference of the reading, the larger the amount of subtle energy. And in case your skepticism is getting high here, there are numerous other research studies that give similar results, showing similar principles emerging. What is the main principle that we're seeing here? What we're seeing here is that the subtle energetic energy can override physical laws. What does that mean? It means that the chemical nature of the water had not changed. It was still the same. Thus, it could not be picked up by the litmus paper. However, its energetic nature had changed in such a way that the digital pH meter would pick it up. What does this mean? It means that the actual pH of the water had been shifted, even though the chemical nature of the water had not been shifted. What does this mean? It means that the subtle energetic world can completely override the physical world, even when the physical world doesn't appear to have changed. There are numerous other research studies bearing this out. Why is this important? Because the more we start to interface with subtle energy that's beneficial in a very intentional and focused way, the more it can begin to override many of the physical dysfunctions we may be experiencing. This is very, very, very important. And again, what this shows us is that human consciousness and the subtle energy component of human consciousness can override physical laws and create real, measurable changes and influences in scientific lab experiments. This means we need to be rewriting our entire science books and even the scientific method itself. I hope you've enjoyed this one. We're going to be talking in future sessions. We're going to be talking about more exciting experiments and subtle energy as it relates to digital energy medicine and the implications these studies have for consciousness studies, a new science of consciousness, and a new science altogether. If you want to read more about this study with Dr. William Tiller, I've placed the link below this video in the description box. I hope you enjoy this. Take care.